He was born 6 weeks too early in a hospital that made a mistake that could not be undone. Too much oxygen in the incubator, his sight gone. He was not yet a week old, and the world had already decided what kind of life he would have. His mother refused to accept that verdict. And because she did, because Lula Mae Hardaway looked at her blind baby boy and saw something the doctors couldn't measure, the world would eventually hear music it had never imagined possible. Tonight, we go beyond the hits, beyond the awards, beyond the legend. We count down the 10 most played Stevie Wonder songs of all time, and we tell you what happened behind each one. The near-fatal crash, the song that was almost given away, the label that quietly considered dropping him before he turned 16, the recording that brought him back from a coma, the child whose laughter he captured on tape and turned into a masterpiece. These are the untold stories, and they start right now. If you love classic R&B and soul music, the kind that changed lives, shaped generations, and told the truth when nothing else would, subscribe to this channel right now. Every countdown we release goes deeper than the surface, deeper than the charts. We want to know which Stevie Wonder song first made you believe in the power of music. Drop it in the comments below and stay with us until number 1, because the story behind that song is more remarkable than most fans have ever been told. Now, let's begin. Stevlin Hardaway Morris was born on May 13, 1950, in Saginaw, Michigan. He was the third of 6 children raised by a single mother who worked multiple jobs, stretched every dollar, and never once allowed her son to believe that blindness was a ceiling. She bought him instruments. She let him make noise. She listened. By age 11, Stevie had been discovered, signed, and delivered to Motown Records, the youngest artist in the label's history. Berry Gordy called him a prodigy. The world called him Little Stevie Wonder. But inside that studio, inside that small boy with the harmonica and the oversized smile, something far larger was already growing, something Motown wasn't fully prepared for. The central question of this entire documentary is not how Stevie Wonder became famous. It's how a blind black boy from Detroit became the most important musical architect of the 20th century, and how close the world came to never knowing his name at all. Number 10, For Once in My Life, 1968. The song that was never his, until he made it immortal. Number 10. And we begin not with the song Stevie Wonder wrote, but with the song he rescued. For Once in My Life was composed in 1965 by Ron Miller and Orlando Murden. Tony Bennett recorded it 2 years later and took it into the top 10 on the adult contemporary charts. It was a polished, respectable ballad, professionally executed, emotionally pleasant, and completely forgettable. Between 1964 and 1966, most of Stevie's singles failed to chart meaningfully. His voice was changing. The Little Stevie image that Motown had built its marketing around was aging out. Label management, facing financial pressure, was ready to let his contract expire. The child prodigy had become an inconvenient in-between, no longer a novelty, not yet a proven adult star. When Stevie and producer Henry Cosby heard For Once in My Life, they didn't hear a Tony Bennett song. They heard a declaration waiting to be made. They stripped away the ballad's comfortable smoothness and rebuilt it with energy, urgency, and emotional hunger. Stevie's vocal performance transformed the lyric from a standard romantic sentiment into something that felt genuinely hard-won, the voice of a young man who understood firsthand what it meant to almost lose everything and then hold on. The result peaked at number 2 on both the Billboard R&B and pop charts, the highest charting single of Stevie's career to that point. More importantly, it announced something the industry had not yet fully accepted. This was no longer a child performing other people's material. This was an artist who could take any song ever written and make it entirely, unmistakably his own. Here is what almost no one knows. For Once in My Life remains one of the most covered recordings in Stevie's catalog. Frank Sinatra recorded it. Michael Jackson recorded it. Dozens of artists have attempted it across 6 decades. Not one version has matched the emotional urgency of Stevie's original, because none of them were recording it while their career hung in the balance. That's what you hear in those vocals. That's what makes this performance immortal. Coming up next, number 9 on our countdown. And this one is different, because this wasn't just Stevie recording a hit. This was Stevie making a decision that would permanently alter the balance of power between an artist and the most famous record label in black music history. The story of how he did it and what it nearly cost him is one you will not want to miss. Number 9. Signed, Sealed, Delivered, I'm Yours, 1970. By 1970, Stevie Wonder had survived the nearly fatal collapse of his early career. He had proven he could perform. He had proven he could interpret other people's songs and make them his own. But there was a question nobody at Motown had seriously entertained yet, and Stevie was about to answer it without asking permission. Could he produce himself? Signed, Sealed, Delivered, I'm Yours was the answer, and it arrived like a declaration. This was the first song Stevie Wonder ever produced on his own, not co-produced, not guided by a senior Motown producer with final approval. Stevie sat in the chair, made the calls, and shaped every element of the recording from the inside out. He was 20 years old. To understand why that mattered, you have to understand what Motown was. Berry Gordy had built his label on a specific formula, songs crafted by staff writers, produced by in-house producers, arranged by the label's musical directors, and delivered to artists whose primary job was to perform. It worked, it produced legends, but it also meant that the artists themselves held very little creative authority over the music attached to their names. Stevie had been inside that system since age 11. He had watched it operate. He had learned from every producer, every session musician, every songwriter who passed through those studios, and by 1970, he had absorbed enough to know he was ready to lead. The recording session carried personal weight that went beyond professional ambition. Stevie had married Syreeta Wright that same year, a gifted songwriter and former Motown secretary who matched his intellectual energy and creative instincts completely. Their partnership brought something into the studio that a corporate formula could never manufacture: genuine emotional investment. The joy inside Signed, Sealed, Delivered is not performed, it is real. What almost no one discussed at the time was the quiet urgency behind the timing. Stevie's Motown contract was set to expire on his 21st birthday, just months away. Every creative decision he made in 1970 was also, whether consciously or not, an audition for the next chapter of his career. He was not just making music, he was making an argument for what kind of artist he intended to become. The label was listening, the industry was watching, and Stevie was only getting started. Coming up at number 8, a song that was born from an improvised moment, nearly handed to another artist, and then claimed by Berry Gordy in a decision that broke an agreement, but created one of the most recognizable recordings in music history. The full story is more surprising than the song's legend suggests. Number 8, Superstition, 1972. There are songs that are carefully constructed over months of writing sessions, demo recordings, and studio refinements. And then there are songs that arrive in a single unplanned moment, fully formed, urgent, and impossible to ignore. Superstition was the second kind. The year was 1972. Stevie was recording Talking Book, the album that would formally announce his transition from Motown hitmaker to complete musical architect. British guitar legend Jeff Beck had been invited into the sessions, his guitar work woven into several tracks, his presence part of a creative exchange between two artists who genuinely respected each other's abilities. The agreement between them was straightforward. Beck contributes guitar, Stevie writes him an original song in return, a fair trade, a gentleman's arrangement. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. Beck wandered over to the studio drum kit during a break and started playing, by his own admission, a simple groove, the only beat he really knew. Stevie heard it from across the room, stopped what he was doing, and asked Beck to keep playing. He sat down at the Hohner clavinet, placed his hands on the keys, and began building something on top of that groove in real time. No charts, no preparation, no second take to refine the idea first. What came out of that improvisation was the opening riff to Superstition, one of the most instantly recognizable 8-bar sequences in the history of recorded music, created in a matter of minutes by a blind man responding instinctively to a rhythm he had heard once. The plan held for a while. Superstition would go to Beck as Stevie's promised contribution, and Beck's newly formed group, Beck, Bogert, and Appice, would release it first. Stevie would move on to completing Talking Book without it. For black musicians navigating the post-civil rights era, a moment defined by both expanded possibility and persistent uncertainty, the song's themes of fate, belief, and the dangers of misplaced faith landed with particular resonance. It was funky enough for the dance floor, and complex enough to reward every repeated listen. Decades later, Dr. Dre, Pharrell Williams, and producers across hip-hop, R&B, and pop have sampled, interpolated, and studied this recording. The groove that Stevie built on top of a borrowed drum beat in an unplanned studio afternoon has never stopped working. It never sounds dated. It never loses its pull. That is not an accident. That is genius operating without a net. But what comes next in this countdown carries a weight that no chart position can fully capture, because number 7 was written before one of the most traumatic moments of Stevie Wonder's life, and then it became the song that pulled him back from the darkest place he had ever been. The story behind it is one of the most remarkable in the history of soul music, and it starts with a car, a flatbed truck, and 4 days of silence. Number 7, Higher Ground, 1973. Some songs arrive as entertainment, some arrive as art, and then very rarely, a song arrives as something that cannot be fully explained, a recording that seems to know something its creator didn't yet understand when he made it. Higher Ground is that kind of song. Stevie Wonder finished it as part of Intervisions, an album that represented his most spiritually ambitious work to that point. The lyrics carried a clear message: perseverance, elevation, the refusal to surrender to circumstance. Gonna keep on trying till I reach my highest ground. He wrote those words in the studio, set them to one of the most propulsive grooves of his career, and moved on to completing the album. He had no way of knowing what those words were about to mean. On August 6, 1973, just 3 days after Intervisions was released, Stevie was a passenger in a rented Mercury cruiser, headphones on, listening to the new album as his cousin John Wesley Harris drove them toward a radio station in Durham, North Carolina. Outside Salisbury, the car struck the back of a flatbed truck. The bed of the truck came through the windshield and hit Stevie directly in the head while he slept. He was rushed to the hospital with a severe brain injury. For 4 days, Stevie Wonder did not regain consciousness. Doctors were uncertain whether he would recover fully or whether the damage would end his ability to make music entirely. He temporarily lost his sense of smell and his sense of taste. A visible scar formed on his forehead. The people closest to him kept vigil and waited. The turning point came from music, as it so often did with Stevie. Gospel singer Ira Tucker, his friend and tour manager, and a former member of the legendary Dixie Hummingbirds, came to the hospital and sat beside Stevie's bed. He leaned close and began singing Higher Ground, softly, repeatedly, directly into Stevie's ear, and something happened that the medical staff could not fully account for. Stevie's fingers began to move, not randomly, in rhythm, tapping out the keyboard patterns from the song on the surface of the hospital bed, note by note, as if the music inside him was still running even when everything else had gone quiet. Three days into his hospital stay, he was able to speak in simple responses. He did not perform again until late January of 1974, but the moment his fingers moved to that melody confirmed what the people who loved him already believed. The music had not left him. When Stevie finally spoke about the accident with any depth, he did not describe it as a tragedy. He described it as an awakening. He said he found himself in a better spiritual place afterward, one that clarified his purpose and sharpened his understanding of what his life was meant to produce. He took the collision between that truck and his skull as something he was meant to survive, and Higher Ground as the song that marked why. The recording reached number 4 on the pop charts and number 1 on R&B. Years later, the Red Hot Chili Peppers covered it and introduced Stevie's message of resilience to a generation that had never heard the original. But no version carries the weight of knowing what Stevie did not yet know when he wrote it, and what it became the moment it was sung back to him in a hospital room while the world held its breath. Before we reach number 6, one of the most socially courageous recordings in the history of soul music, take a moment right now and subscribe to this channel if these stories are moving you the way they're moving us. If Stevie Wonder's music has ever meant something real in your life, drop your favorite song in the comments below. Every legend in this countdown has chapters most fans have never heard, and we are just past the halfway point. The most extraordinary stories in this documentary are still ahead. Stay with us. Number 6, Living for the City, 1973. In 1973, at the height of his commercial power, Stevie Wonder made a decision that most artists at his level would never have risked. He used a mainstream soul record, one that would play on pop radio, on R&B stations, in living rooms across America, to put systemic racism, police corruption, and the criminal justice system directly on trial. Not metaphorically, literally. Living for the City tells a specific story. A young black man grows up in Mississippi in grinding poverty, raised by parents who work themselves to exhaustion for wages that never stretch far enough. He believes in the promise of something better. He moves to New York City, and the city does not save him, it destroys him. He is framed for drug possession within hours of arriving, sentenced to 10 years in prison. His dream, his family's sacrifice, his entire future, dismantled by a system that was never designed to give him a fair outcome. Stevie did not write this story from imagination. He wrote it from observation, from conversations with friends and family, from the patterns he had witnessed throughout his life, navigating a country that celebrated black talent while structuring its institutions against black survival. The song's spoken word breakdown section, in which the arrest and sentencing play out in real time over the music, remains one of the most viscerally honest sequences ever committed to a soul recording. The song reached number 8 on the pop charts and number 1 on R&B. For Black listeners in 1973, the response was not simply appreciation, it was recognition. Hearing their reality reflected in a record played on mainstream radio, performed by one of the most famous artists in the world, carried a validation that went far beyond entertainment. The song's reach did not stop at its own decade. Public Enemy built a movement on the same principles Stevie established here. Kendrick Lamar has cited this recording as foundational to his understanding of what music can be asked to carry. The blueprint Stevie drew on Intervisions, using popular music as a vehicle for social testimony, has never stopped influencing the artists who came after him. One detail that rarely surfaces in discussions of this song, Stevie recorded it just months after surviving the accident that had nearly ended his life. He had been given a second chance, and he chose to spend part of it making a record that made people uncomfortable. That was not accidental. That was deliberate. That was an artist who understood exactly what his platform was for. Coming up next, number 5. And after the social weight of living for the city, the story takes the most tender turn in this entire countdown, because the next song was not written for the world. It was written for one person, a newborn girl. And what Stevie was going through when he recorded it, the crisis he was quietly facing, the life he had considered walking away from entirely, makes this recording far more remarkable than most fans have ever realized. Number 5. Isn't She Lovely? 1976. There is a version of this story where Stevie Wonder never records this song, where he quietly steps away from the music industry at the height of his creative powers, boards a plane, and begins an entirely different life on an entirely different continent. That version of events was closer to reality than most people know. He seriously considered relocating to Ghana, not for a visit, permanently. He wanted to trace his ancestry, to work directly with disabled children, to live outside the machinery of the American music industry that had surrounded him since he was 11 years old. He described it as a quarter-life crisis, a phrase that sounds mild until you understand that the person experiencing it was one of the most successful recording artists on the planet, and he was genuinely prepared to leave all of it behind. What changed was a child. He captured it immediately, not metaphorically, literally. Stevie recorded Aisha's actual sounds in those first days of her life and wove them directly into the track. Her presence is not referenced in the song. She is in the song. Her voice, her laughter, her first attempts at sound are embedded in the recording itself, preserved in music the way other parents preserve photographs. Isn't She Lovely reached the top of the R&B charts, but Stevie chose not to release it as a conventional pop single, believing the song's 6-minute length and deeply personal nature made it something to be experienced within the album rather than edited down for radio. That decision cost him a mainstream chart position, and he accepted that without hesitation. Aisha Morris grew up to become a musician. She has performed alongside her father on multiple occasions, her voice sharing stages that her laughter once shared on tape. The song her father wrote in the first days of her life became part of the soundtrack of her own. Coming up at number 4, the simplest song Stevie Wonder ever wrote. No grand social statement, no spiritual complexity, just a melody, a message, and a phone call he owed his mother. And somehow, it became number 1 in 28 countries. The story of why starts long before the recording session, and it involves John Lennon, a dream that never came true, and a guilt that quietly shaped one of the biggest hits of the 1980s. Number 4. I Just Called to Say I Love You, 1984. After everything this countdown has revealed, the near-fatal crash, the social manifestos, the deeply personal portraits of fatherhood and survival, it might seem surprising that the fourth most played Stevie Wonder song of all time contains none of that complexity, no synthesizer revolution, no spoken word indictment of systemic injustice, no 6-minute journey through a human soul, just a phone call. Just 3 words, just the reminder that sometimes the most important thing you can say requires no occasion, no preparation, and no particular moment to justify saying it. But the story behind this song is more layered than the song itself suggests. It begins with his mother, Lula Mae Hardaway, the woman who had refused to accept that her blind baby boy was limited, who had filled their home with instruments and encouragement, who had been the first person to believe in Stevie Wonder before the world had any reason to, had begun asking her son a quiet question. Not in anger, not as an accusation, simply as a mother who had watched her child become one of the most famous people on earth and had noticed, in the midst of all that fame, that the phone didn't ring as often as it once had. Why don't you call more? Stevie heard that question the way he heard music, deeply and with his full attention. He recognized in it something he had allowed to slip away while building a career that had consumed his entire adult life. The most important relationship he had ever known was being quietly neglected, not out of indifference, but out of the kind of distraction that success creates when nobody is monitoring the cost. The world received what Stevie gave them without knowing what he had originally intended, and the response was staggering. I Just Called to Say I Love You reached #1 in 28 countries. It became one of the most commercially successful singles of the entire decade. In 1985, it won the Academy Award for Best Original Song, making Stevie one of a very small number of black artists to receive that recognition in that category at that time. The legal challenges came alongside the celebration. 2 songwriters claimed the title and chorus concept had been borrowed from a song they had written in September 1976. Stevie testified that his version had been written in July of that year, 2 months before theirs. The case was dismissed. What remained, stripped of every surrounding circumstance, was the message itself. You do not need a birthday, an anniversary, or a crisis to tell someone that they matter to you. You need only a phone and the willingness to say the words before it's too late to say them. Stevie had learned that lesson from his mother. He gave it to the world. 3 songs remain in this countdown, and number 3 is unlike anything else on this list because it wasn't written from personal pain, personal love, or personal survival. It was written as an act of historical duty, a superstar honoring the giants who built the foundation he stood on, and the names he called out in that song were names a generation of listeners had nearly forgotten entirely. Number 3, Sir Duke, 1977. Duke Ellington died on May 24, 1974. He was 75 years old, and he had spent more than 5 decades building an artistic legacy so vast and so foundational that American music as the world understood it simply could not have existed without him. Orchestra leader, composer, band leader, pioneer, a black man who had walked into segregated venues, negotiated with hostile promoters, and created some of the most sophisticated music ever written, not despite the obstacles placed in front of him, but alongside them, every single day of his career. Within weeks of Ellington's passing, Stevie Wonder began thinking about a song, not a eulogy, not a somber reflection, something joyful, because Duke Ellington's music had always been joyful, even when the circumstances surrounding it were not. Stevie wanted to write something that sounded like gratitude felt, something that honored not just Ellington, but the entire generation of black musical architects whose names were already beginning to fade from mainstream conversation by the mid-1970s. He said it plainly. So soon they are forgotten. I wanted to show my appreciation. That instinct, the impulse to name names, to call the roll, to insist that history remember who built the foundation, produced one of the most musically joyful and historically significant recordings of Stevie's entire career. Sir Duke opens with a horn arrangement that announces itself like a celebration, refusing to be modest about it. The title itself is a statement, Sir as a term of deliberate respect, Duke as the name the world already knew, the combination elevating Ellington to the kind of royalty that no award committee had the authority to confer, but that history had already confirmed. The lyrics move outward from Ellington to name Count Basie, Glenn Miller, Louis Armstrong, and Ella Fitzgerald, each name dropped into a pop song that would play on mainstream radio, reaching listeners who may never have sought out a jazz record in their lives. That was precisely the point. Stevie was not making music for jazz purists who already knew these names. He was making music for the 19-year-old who had grown up on funk and soul and had never been formally introduced to the people whose innovations had made both of those genres possible. Sir Duke was a history lesson delivered inside one of the most purely pleasurable grooves Stevie had ever constructed. And it worked because you could dance to it before you fully understood what it was teaching you. Stevie has spoken about feeling a deep personal connection to Ellington, not just as a musical hero, but as a fellow black artist who had spent his career navigating a country that wanted his talent without always honoring his humanity. Honoring Ellington was, in some sense, Stevie's way of acknowledging the lineage he belonged to and the debt he intended to spend his career repaying. Two songs remain, and as we move toward the final countdown positions, the stories only grow larger. Because number 2 was written for a woman Stevie has never publicly named, and it became the recording that earned him his first Grammy Award, while quietly redefining what vulnerability was allowed to sound like in a soul love song. Number 2, You Are the Sunshine of My Life, 1972. She has never been publicly named. Stevie Wonder has given dozens of interviews across 6 decades, and in none of them has he identified the woman who inspired the song that sits at number 2 in this countdown. That silence is not evasion. It feels, if anything, like protection, a way of keeping something genuinely private inside a life that has unfolded almost entirely in public. What he has said is that she made his world brighter, and he wrote a song about it. You Are the Sunshine of My Life arrived on Talking Book in 1972, the same album that contains Superstition, which means Stevie Wonder released what would become the 2 most played songs of his career on the same record in the same year. That is not a coincidence. That is what creative freedom, finally fully realized, sounds like when it has nowhere left to hold back. The song represented something new in Stevie's artistic vocabulary. After the funky declaration of Superstition, after the social commentary that was already forming in his creative consciousness, You Are the Sunshine of My Life arrived as a tender, unhurried portrait of romantic gratitude. There is nothing complicated about what it says. There is everything complicated about how it makes you feel when you hear it. Stevie played nearly every instrument on the recording himself, clavinet, synthesizer, drums, bass, a practice that had by now become less a technical achievement and more simply how he worked. The song won him his first Grammy Award for Best Male R&B Vocal Performance. It reached number 1 on both the Billboard Hot 100 and the R&B charts. And it entered a permanent place in the American emotional vocabulary, played at weddings, at celebrations, in the quiet moments when someone needed to tell another person that their presence had changed everything. Luther Vandross studied this recording. Maxwell has cited it. Generations of soul artists have returned to it as a reference point for how to write a love song that does not perform emotion, but simply delivers it directly and without ornamentation to the person listening. The woman who inspired it has remained unnamed. The song has remained timeless. Sometimes that is exactly the right trade. And now, number 1. Superstition, 1972. We have told part of this story already. The drum groove, the clavinet, the improvised riff, Berry Gordy's intervention, Jeff Beck's graciously accepted disappointment. But the full weight of Superstition, as the most played Stevie Wonder song of all time, deserves to be held for a moment before we simply confirm what the countdown has been building toward. Consider what this recording actually is. It was created in an unplanned afternoon by a blind man responding instinctively to a rhythm he had heard once. It was almost released under another artist's name. It was claimed by a record label executive who broke an agreement because his instincts told him the world needed to hear this specific recording performed by this specific artist. And then it was released into a cultural moment, 1972, post-civil rights uncertainty, a generation navigating the gap between promised progress and daily reality, and it connected with that moment so completely that 50 years have not loosened its grip by a single measure. The clavinet riff Stevie built that afternoon remains one of the most sampled sounds in the history of recorded music. Dr. Dre has built on it. Pharrell Williams has referenced it. Ed Sheeran has covered it. Michael Jackson recorded his own version. Every generation that has encountered Superstition has found something in it that belongs to them. The groove that never dates, the warning that never stops being relevant, the proof that genius operating without a safety net can produce something the world will still be playing long after the moment that produced it has become history. Stevie has said the song was his way of warning people about the cost of misplaced belief, the danger of surrendering your faith to the wrong things. But he has also acknowledged that it became something more personal than that. After years of being managed, directed, and controlled by a system that viewed him primarily as a commercial asset, Superstition was the sound of an artist who had finally claimed full ownership of his creative instincts. And those instincts had produced a #1 record, 2 Grammy Awards, and a recording that has never once needed to be rediscovered because it has never been forgotten. That is the difference between a hit and a legacy. Before we bring this documentary to its close, if this countdown has taken you somewhere you didn't expect to go, subscribe to this channel right now. We exist to tell these stories, the ones behind the music, beneath the surface of the songs you grew up loving, inside the lives of the artists who gave everything to create them. Drop your favorite Stevie Wonder song in the comments and tell us what it means to you. Tell us which entry in this countdown surprised you most, or which song you believe deserved an even higher ranking. This is a community built on the love of classic R&B and soul music, and every comment, every share, every subscription keeps these stories alive. The next countdown is coming, and the artist waiting at the center of it has a story just as extraordinary, just as hidden, and just as necessary as everything you've heard tonight. Don't miss it.